Grab your torches and pitchforks, y'all, because in today's case, we're going to be covering a self-proclaimed vampire. And unfortunately, this one is just about the furthest thing you can get from Edward Cullen. He doesn't sparkle, he's not immortal, and he's definitely not Robert Pattinson. But John Crutchley does have one thing in common with vampires. I can already tell you, this is gonna be a messy one. So it's Thanksgiving in 1985, and a man is driving down a stretch of sunny road in Malabar, Florida. As he's driving, he sees something moving along the side of the road in the distance. He gets closer, and that's when he realizes it's a young woman. She's completely nude, her wrists and ankles are shackled together, and she's crawling along the side of the road. I warned you. He immediately pulls over and gets the girl in his car. She's extremely pale, completely weak, and covered in dirt. But still, she points to a house nearby and tells the man to remember that house. Did anyone else just get the chills? The guy drives her to his house, and he and his wife get her clothes and immediately call an ambulance.
Copy 20 minutes.
When the woman gets to the hospital, doctors are shocked when they realize that 40 to 45% of her fluid is gone. That's when she begins to tell the story of what exactly happened to her. And this girl was probably like, "Do you have a chair? You're gonna need it." She tells the doctors and later the authorities in the investigation that she was out hitchhiking, you know, like people did in the 80s. And she says this man pulled up on the side of the road and offered her a ride. The man was polite, was dressed in a business suit, and just looked overall professional. He told the girl that he would take her anywhere she needed to go. As they were driving, the man turned to her and said he just needed to stop by his house real quick. Oh, big yikes, big yikes. But of course, she didn't want to be rude, so she was like, okay, that's cool, I guess. They pulled up to the house and he invited her inside, but she declined, so he went inside without her. After a little bit, he came back out and said he was just gonna grab something from the back seat real quick, and then after that, they'd be on their way. He reached behind the back of her seat, which is when the girl felt a cord around her neck, and then everything went black. The next thing the girl knows, she was chained, lying down on a kitchen counter, and her eyes were being held shut with a piece of tape, but she could still open her eyes and see a little bit under the tape. So she tried to look around and was able to see just enough to make out some lights and a tripod, and that's when she realized the man was filming her. But instead of Ashton Kutcher coming out and telling her she's actually on the TV show Punk'd, she realized that she had just become the star of her own personal horror movie. The girl felt a prick in her arm and heard the man tell her that he was a vampire. As all of that was going on, she started to feel dizzy and quickly realized what was happening. As he continued to drain her arm, he explained to her that he was going to drink it. Throughout the rest of that day, he took her to various places in the house to commit lewd acts on her, and continued to live out his Transylvanian fantasy by periodically taking out more vials from the girl's arm and drinking them. The girl woke up the next day and it was the same horrific nightmare all over again. But this time, when he handcuffed her, he took her into the bathroom and locked her in. He then told her that he had to step out for something, but to not even think about trying to escape because his brother was in the house listening, and that she would not make it out alive if she tried. But this girl had already decided that if she was to be the unwilling star of this movie, then damn it, she was gonna be the hero of it too. So she waited until the car left and immediately sprung into action. Despite the fact that the vampire had now taken vials from her 3 separate times, making her completely weak, she managed to stand up and pull herself up to the tiny window in the bathroom. She saw that the lock on the window was busted and knew that that was her sign from above, so she shimmied herself out of the window and landed on the dirt below. Investigators later say that they truly don't know how this girl managed to climb out of the window, and that it seems so impossibly small for someone to fit through. But this skinny legend did it anyway. But remember, her ankles and wrists were still shackled together, so she had to figure out how she was going to get away as quickly as possible. She managed to hop herself to the main road, and a few trucks passed her before our Good Samaritan spotted her and scooped her up. At first, I couldn't believe that she said trucks kept passing her by, but then I thought about how seeing a woman in that condition on the side of the road would kind of look like something out of a horror movie, so maybe the drivers were legit too freaked out to pull over. After hearing all of this, the doctors are absolutely stunned. They tell the girl that it's a miracle she got out when she did, because there was no way she would have been able to last another night without transfusions. So police get a search warrant and go to the small, unassuming white house that the woman pointed out, and that's where they find 39-year-old John Brennan Crutchley. Inside John's house, officials find the tripod, lights, and video camera that the woman describes. But whoops, what do you know, all the tapes of the previous days have been recorded over. Based on the lighting equipment and restraints alone, the cops know that this is not the first time John has done something like this. But when they find a stack of credit cards with different names of different women, along with a stash of jewelry hidden in his back closet, they knew they were dealing with a real-life monster. They arrest John for the crimes he committed against the woman, but the investigators now know that they are dealing with a trained predator, and so they call up the FBI. Oh yeah, baby, bring out the big boys. Now that we know what John does, it's time to figure out why. The FBI starts to build a profile on this guy, and they say that they are dealing with an organized serial offender who has absolutely done this before. They begin to look into missing persons cases all around the county. And that's when they find out that 4 unidentified women's bodies have been discovered in the previous year alone. Time to call up Van Helsing. And that's when the detectives notice that John has moved around quite a bit and changes jobs a lot. So they start looking into the areas around the homes where John had previously lived. As soon as they do, they notice an unusual amount of cold cases and unidentified bodies of young women in these areas as well. While they continue to build their case, the profilers begin to look into who exactly this John the Vampire actually was. You know how most of our monsters come from broken homes, violent parents, and unsavory living conditions? Well, not John. They find out that John was actually born into a really wealthy family. But money can't buy happiness, because John Sferrantu apparently had no friends growing up. John was described as spending most of his time alone, tinkering with his gadgets. John grew up to get a degree in physics and a master's in engineering, which landed him a job at this electronic corporation that makes radios and other parts for cars. John is living proof that you can be born into privilege and still manage to be an absolute mistake. He ended up getting fired as quickly as he was hired when the company opened an investigation into missing materials that they believed John stole. So then he got a job in Virginia in the 70s, where he worked for a few high-tech firms in the DC area. Because everyone deserves a second chance, right? All of a sudden, a bunch of teenage girls started to go missing in the DC area. When he lived in Pennsylvania, there were numerous cases of missing women and bodies that popped up all around that area. In 1978, a woman named Deborah Fitzjohn went missing, and John became a suspect when he was the last person she was seen with alive. There were a few other cases that the FBI suspects John of, but with no evidence to go off of, they weren't able to prove it. John moved to Palm Beach, Florida in 1983, and 2 years later, the cops are finally able to catch the elusive creature of the night. You'd think Florida would be the last place a vampire would want to live, but also, it's Florida. And with their notorious history of gruesome and insane crimes, I guess it tracks. So the cops get a second search warrant to go back into John's house for the stack of credit cards and hidden pile of jewelry they'd seen the first time they searched the house. But none of it's there. And now they don't have any hard evidence to tie him to any of the cold cases they suspect him of. What they do have, however, are charges to arrest John for the acts he committed on the brave woman who was able to escape the clutches of a true monster. Ooh. if that's not the log line right there. When John goes to court, he argues that his victim was a Manson girl who solicited him for her kinky services because, you know, cowardly men will never take responsibility for their actions. Which, okay, even if she was a lady of the night, I can bet you she did not plan on her night ending in exsanguination, John. And then John's own wife gets up to testify. She says this case is nothing more than an S&M romp that got out of hand, even though she wasn't there. Yeah, she was out of town with her and John's child at the time. Oh, did I mention John has a child? I know. I guess Twilight was right. They really can procreate. After the trial, John's wife tells the swarming reporters that she didn't understand what the big fuss is about, that her husband is just a kinky sort of guy. During the sentencing, the FBI profiler gives such a strong and convincing testimony that it's enough to convince the jury that John is an active serial monster, despite the fact that they can't find the bodies just yet. Crutchley is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. But after serving 11 years, he gets out on good behavior. I'm sorry, what? But get this, the city of Malabar and the city of Fairfax are both literally like, no, you're not gonna live here. So he has to go live in his halfway house in Orlando. You know it's bad when Florida doesn't even want you. Less than a day later, he's arrested for violating his parole when he's arrested for taking a toke. Because this is strike 3 for Crutchley, the first charge for taking the woman hostage and the second for lewd acts he committed on her, testing positive for MJ meant that John would be thrown in the slammer for life. You guys, the thing that is so wild about this is that John got the MJ when he was in jail that day at the release party the inmates threw for him. He argued that he was nervous for Vampy's big day out and he hoped it would calm him down. Some people even speculate that the cops either purposefully ignored or possibly even supplied the joint to John since they hated him so much, and they saw it as a way to send a monster away for good. In March of 2002, guards find John unresponsive in his cell with a plastic bag over his head, which I guess means it doesn't take a wooden stake through the heart after all. But if vampires aren't your thing and you're more of a sci-fi fan, sit tight, I've got a little present for you. After his passing, the team searching his house find some very interesting items in his possession, including a bunch of highly classified information on naval communications and weaponry. Apparently, when John was working as a computer engineer for a company in Palm Bay, he was given this top secret security clearance at the Pentagon, which meant John legit had access to projects for NASA and the US Navy. Some federal agencies even considered opening a freaking espionage case because of what they found. Like, that's insane. During the final years he spent in Florida, skeletal remains of unidentified women kept popping up within miles of his home, and police were never able to find any shred of evidence to link someone to these cases. But as soon as Johnny Boy is imprisoned, the skeletal remains stopped appearing. Quite convenient. But why had no one ever suspected him before? Profilers say the thing about John that makes him so dangerous is the fact that he's smart, unassuming, and kind of just fades into the background. Despite his dark, beady eyes and creepy stare, John is this seemingly normal, mild-mannered guy who generally flies under the radar. He is the master of being the background character, someone who just blends in. He pretends to be a family man, holds these white-collar jobs. Heck, it's even confirmed that he's got a genius-level IQ. The FBI detectives on his case speculate he has a body count of up to 30 women. But because John is so smart, organized, and calculating, they'll never have any way to actually prove it. When they use the term organized, they're talking about a very specific kind of suspect. This type of person has advanced social skills, plans their crimes ahead of time, and is smart enough to get rid of the evidence. Robert Ressler says that John Crutchley has all the hallmarks of a serial killer. With his stack of trophies from victims, the horrendous medical acts he commits, and the methodical cleanup job when he finishes, it truly is a miracle that his last victim was able to escape and finally lock the bat in his cage. John Brennan Crutchley is easily one of the worst cases I've ever heard. If you can handle it, I highly recommend you look up a picture of John too, to get the full horror movie in your head. In his mugshot, John is a creepy thing to behold, and might be one of the closest looking things I've seen to the actual undead. So I'm gonna grab a few garlic knots for the road, just in case. See you next time, hopefully.